Thank you all for joining us tonight for a conversation with Jessicay and Katarina Weslien. My name is Annika Early, and I'm the Managing Director of Speedwell Projects. Speedwell is an artist-run nonprofit gallery that promotes and archives the work of women who have made a lifetime commitment to their artistic practices. Our programming includes solo and group exhibitions, residencies, community events, and the publication of catalogs and documentaries. Speedwell is located in Portland, Maine, which is traditional territory of the Wabanaki Confederacy, including the Abenaki, Micmac, Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, and Maliseet nations. We acknowledge the painful history of colonialization, genocide, and forced removal from this territory, and we recognize that we exist on this land because of the stewardship of both ancestral and contemporary Indigenous individuals and nations. I'd like to introduce you to our two speakers this evening, Katarina Weslien and Jessicay. Katarina is a multidisciplinary artist and educator. Her work takes form in cross-media installations, collaborative efforts, textile constructions, and print media. She builds her projects through layers of research with a particular interest in how images and objects elicit thoughts, emotions, and embodied knowledge. By investigating the possibilities of how different confluences of materials, people, events, and the environment reflect our interdependence, her work serves to reveal how meaning is embedded and exposed within the context of shifting sets of circumstances. Weslien received her BFA in textiles from the Utah State University and her MFA from Cranbrook Academy of Art. She's the former editor of the Moth Press at the Maine College of Art, where she was also the director of graduate studies. More recently, she has taught at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she also co-led study trips to India that focus on material culture and pilgrimage studies. Her work has been exhibited internationally and recognized with awards from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Payson Foundation, and the Maine Arts Commission, among others. Jessicay is the recently named Managing Director of Art and Exhibitions at the Trustees, a Boston-based land conservancy that cares for 120 properties throughout Massachusetts, and Artistic Director of the DeCordova Sculpture Park and Museum. Previously, May served as the Deputy Director and Robert and Elizabeth Nanovic Chief Curator at the Portland Museum of Art in Maine. May is the curator of the upcoming exhibition Clifford Ross Sightlines at the PMA and is the editor of the 2021 book David Driscoll, Icons of Nature and History. We will open the conversation for questions at the end of the evening. Please share your questions via the chat. In addition to her beautiful work featured in her solo exhibition, Katarina has also published a book that chronicles her Walking Kailash Invitational project. The project features art, writing, and poetry from 20 artists from around the world who took walks of compassion wherever they found themselves. The project is based on Weslien's circumambulation of Mount Kailash in Tibet in 2004. If you'd like to purchase a copy, visit us at speedwellprojects.com/shop or stop by the gallery Wednesday through Saturday from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. Lastly, Katarina's stunning solo show, What Did You Smell When You Were Away, is on view in Speedwell through July 10th. Welcome, Jessicay and Katarina.
Thank you. Thank you, Annika. So I feel incredibly lucky because even though I'm looking at a screen, I'm also looking at old friends and actual audience members. So what an incredible moment of hope and joy in the midst of a lot of not hope and joy, which feels very connected to the show. And I thought we would start because we are going to talk about India tonight. And because we are for the first time in a very long time in a room with other human beings, maybe just honoring the fact that so many in India right now are in a profoundly scary spot with the COVID deaths in that country.
I completely agree. It's a horrible situation that's probably not getting better anytime soon.
It's really amazing. But I'm going to focus on the fact that this space, this show, has a profoundly hopeful overall presence. And we are going to talk tonight about the three different projects that are on view in this show, each of which have a fascinating and connected history and we're going to come back around to 3 sort of tentpole concepts that I will admit that we agreed on in advance. Sorry. It's going to look a little bit more improvisational than it is.
I think it will be.
It will be, yeah. We're fresh thinkers. But we talked about the ways in which these 3 projects all coalesce around the concept of pilgrimage, the concept of community, and the concept of translation, all of which are incredibly complicated, but really important to each of these projects. So while we're standing here now in a room with works that were inspired by the Kumbh gathering, I'm also looking out at the group of works called Walking Kailash, and behind this corner there is an entirely different set of works based on the concept of prasad. And I wonder if you'll just tell us a little bit, introduce us to these 3 bodies.
Sure. And I want to say thank you for doing this. And when we first talked about this, we said, well, let's hope that it's a time when we can be vaccinated and do this maskless. So this is the first, actually.
Me too.
Yeah, and the first for Speedwell as well, with a scant few people here. But it's just nice to have that feeling of everyone here. And because it's just, I think we've done so much Zooming in so long. So this show consists of 3 works, all based not in planning, but based on the River Ganges, starting with a pilgrimage to Mount Kailash that actually Alison Hildreth came into my studio and said, Bob Thurman is going to Kailash, we have to go. And we did, and it was probably one of the hardest trips I've ever done, only because the breathing at 18,000 feet is really difficult. But at that height, there is a lake called the Lake of Compassion. And as many pilgrims do, they go with an idea and with a notion and a belief, and that belief system is made manifest through material presence, and the material presence of this mountain and its history, and also this lake. And this mountain is sacred to Buddhists and Jains, and there's a great deal of mythology that's associated with this mountain. But there, I collected this water of compassion, and brought it home. And in the studio, really wondered, well, where does compassion lie? I mean, is it in the water? Is it in the projection? Is it in the image? Like, where can this possibly be? And I did a series of works looking at the water microscopically, and then decided to ask 20 artists around the world for them to do a walk in their neighborhood or wherever they lived, and to try to answer that question. And that project culminated in the book, Walking Kailash. There it is, and it's just out. I'm very happy, and John Kramer designed it, and very grateful to him. And the other project that's here are these jacquard weavings that started off by a visit to the Kumbh Mela, and I've been there twice, the first time for a month. And I'm really interested in why, this notion of pilgrimage, this notion of a belief in something that cannot be seen, but is made manifest through material. So I went to the Kumbh Mela, the largest gathering of humans on the planet, and stayed for a month, and many, you probably have seen images of this sort of spectacle of millions of people, and also naked sadhus bathing in the confluence of these 2 rivers, based on the mythology of an elixir that falls to the earth, and that one can empty oneself of past karma. So, I am not a Hindu, obviously, but I'm curious to see how that manifests itself in place and belief system. So I went and really turned my back on the river and all the people, and started to really concentrate on structures. And it was no accident that there was a whole group of people there who designed refugee camps. And they came to study how the Indian government were able to put together an entire city that held 35 million people at one time on the banks of a river that at another time of the year is 10 feet underwater.
And this is something that happens on a regular but not annual basis. It happens every 12 years.
Yes, yes.
And it's a gathering that comes together, becomes a tent city.
It becomes a tent city. And the structure of that, and I've always been interested in that kind of sort of ephemeral architecture. So I really just wandered, and the piece that's behind us is looking into one of these tents. So all this material is made with mostly fabric and wood, and even the wood is wrapped, but it's making of a place that felt like, because most of them were empty when I was there in that particular place. So it was like a space of anticipation, or has something happened, and they were like almost like ghosts in some way. But I think if you think about it materially, it's, you know, I didn't want these things to speak to the Kumela necessarily, even though its origin is there. It's really about, if we can think of it in a larger way, about how we, as, you know, people, when we don't live in really wealthy countries, how we're forced to look at everything around us as a, you know, material possibility. So you put, you know, different fabrics, different materials together to make place. And after looking at these images for a long time and photographing them, no matter how large they were, they never really had the feel of what the material, what the actual spaces were. So, and then I realized, because my background, you know, way back when, is in textiles, and my sensibility is always material. I understand things materially. And so doing these jacquards, I think that is, you take an image which is about this illusion and pixelation in a digital sense, but the jacquard is a pixelation through thread, and the thread is three-dimensional color. And so you have this three-dimensional, very textural quality here, which is read very much. It keeps you in this space, and it's very, I mean, it's very physical. It's very material.
So it's so interesting about the works that are around us, and you can see a number of the works on the website, but you can also see this amazing piece behind us, is that you made a series of photographs of these.
And you saw those.
I saw those photographs. I mean, the first time I became aware of this project, and in fact, the first time I was introduced to the extraordinary nature of the Kumela was coming to this gallery probably 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, and seeing a series of photographs. And you, at that time, one of the things that I absolutely loved, and I think this is a real kudos to Speedwell, is that you were still working it out.
Yeah, I was.
In real time. And it was so amazing to have this show up and to be able to have this experience of what was a very moving show, but also for you to say, I'm still thinking this through, which I just think, I just want to sort of highlight how cool that is actually as a viewer of art and somebody who has sympathy for an artistic process. So you went back and said, okay, I wasn't done. And you turned to a 1,200-year-old European tradition, which is the jacquard silk weaving tradition. And you had to work with folks in Flanders who have been working since the Middle Ages. I mean, this is the great European tapestries.
Yes, right.
But who are now working from digital photographs.
Right. So it's gone from, you know, punch cards, you know, now the punch card is the, you know, the digital software that translates. And it's not as easy as just taking a file and, you know, and translating that information. It's also understanding what materials to use. The fact that, you know, protein fibers respond to light very differently than, you know, say cotton or, you know, artificial thing. And then also the type of weave. So what was wonderful about these weavers outside Ghent is that there's a very small family. There's only 3 of them. It's a father, his daughter, and her husband. And they work with files with, you know, with artists from all over. And they also make very traditional Flanders tapestries. But to go back and forth, and I had to visit them first. That was really clear to me, that it wasn't, I had to see it. I don't think you can experience these things or anything that like cloth just from a file that you see in you know, in Dropbox. It's impossible. Right. So, and just knowing them, and we could talk through exactly how, you know, how we wanted this. And then we sent the weavings back and forth. I mean, FedEx so that I could look, we could talk, and then they would do it again until we got it. And I think with this exhibition being postponed for a year and a half, it actually gave me even more time to work it out. I don't think this piece would have been made in the same way if I didn't have that extra time.
What's so fascinating to me, and it does pick up on my tent pole because I'm a themes kind of lady, but what's so fascinating to me is the extent to which there's just this like whole series of translations. So there's profound cultural translation, but then there's the translation from a fabric tent or tent-like structure to a photograph, ink on paper, and then to this, to a kind of repurposing of this other European artistic tradition. And out of all of that, every element is held on to. So I'm looking at a work that is across the room from us, where I'm looking at what has a kind of plastic sheen of the tent, and I'm seeing photographic effect, a plastic effect, a fabric effect, and almost painterly abstract effect. There's a whole series of translations in your head. Those didn't come about at once, they came about through process.
Well, it took 2 years to figure out that this is what this needed to be. And I think for those of you on Zoom, the pieces that we're talking, there are 4 pieces that are in the tradition of painting, and they're fragments of these tents. And you don't necessarily know what it is you're seeing. There is that illusion there. They're also hung in a certain way that they're not straight. They are really funky, and the shadow, I want to be, to have that be seen. This big weaving, and the one over on the other side is, it's really, it's doubling in a way. I mean, it's like, what is it that you're seeing, and what is it? And for me, what happened in trying to do it in the photograph, it was representation. And I think once it became the weaving, it was a weaving of a weaving, especially when you have a houndstooth cloth, which is woven in a certain way. And then you have that rewoven again. It's like this doubling effect, and it builds on itself and folds in on itself. And I think that kind of investigation is not unlike how we figure things out anyway. So it's that by complicating what you're seeing, you're also not just seeing it, you're feeling it, because there's a somatic, there's a somatic effect, because this is material. It's not the illusion, it's not paper. So for me, it felt like, well, coming home of sorts. I started out as a weaver. I actually started out, I wanted to be an architect, and then took one weaving course, and that was it. I was hooked, you know, and because you could feel it. It wasn't drawing something, it was actually making something with material. And I believe all materials have a certain language. And the language that one has when you're working with cloth is very different than when you're working with metal, or you're working, it's just, you use that. And if you understand that, you can sort of put these things together and make that translation. So I think that's why, for me, these needed to be this. And as I said, it took way too long not way too long. It just took what it took.
Right?
Exactly.
We all slowed down. I mean, the show is very much about slowing down.
Yes.
So I think you're in good company with your own art in that respect.
Okay, very good.
So it's a return to fabrics. One of the things that I'm going to quote back to you from the amazing documentary that is on the Speedwell website is you saying that when people first saw these works, their body language changed because they wanted to touch them. And you mentioned the somatic quality. And one of the things that's so interesting to me about the show, these works included, is that you have embroidery on silk, and you have made a series of works, which maybe I'll ask you to describe, that are that originate in an exchange of gift, and translate and translate and translate until they do actually also wind up having a fabric element in addition to a water element.
So it's a project. So that's the third project, and that's when I was teaching at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Joan Livingstone and I took students to India, and we worked with the Kriti Gallery and Navneet Raman there. And we worked with him to organize these trips. There's also residency where I stayed. And I've been to Benares a number of times, or Varanasi. And what these places are like, these places, meaning Varanasi being continuous city for thousands of years, with temples that are, it's a city of Shiva, lots of Durga temples, but not just one, but there are multiple ones. And so the way one would go to Kailash, for instance, you would go to Mount Kailash in Western Tibet, take days to get there, and then you would circumambulate. In Benares, what you have is that you have temples that are the duplication of these larger events, that if you can't go there on a pilgrimage, it's a miniature version in Benares, and that happens on many, many different levels there. So I went to a number of temples, and when you go to a temple, there is something called darshan, where you go to be seen, and to see and to be seen of the deity. And then there is an intermediary that, unless it's really out in the wilderness somewhere, it's very difficult to actually go. Even if you're a Hindu, there is that barrier of someone taking your gift that you bring, they bring it to the deity and then do a puja, do a ceremony, and then bring a gift back, not necessarily what you brought. So I went to a number of these temples, and then with each one, I had sort of the gift from that temple, and then I bottled that, and then added Ganges water to it, brought it back to my studio, and let it sit for a number of weeks until it really started to, putrefy is the word I use. And then I used that water to pour a stain on each paper from each temple. And that became a figure. And so in all of this work that my hand isn't necessarily in it. There's always, even with the embroidery and the hand spun, hand woven cloth, the embroidery is done by a machine. Mm-hmm. These images are, they're not my hand, but the cloth has hand. The Reciprocity Project is the only one where I'm actually taking cloth, and from a very dear friend in Rome, Christina Bomba, and where we were visiting there with another friend, and we were given this cloth, and most of her pieces are made in India, beautiful silks. And it felt as if these little stains that became almost anthropomorphic in some way, they felt, there's an intimacy to those in the process that doesn't exist, I think, in the other work, mm-hmm. because there is a hand that actually sews the mm-hmm. fabric on as a sign of, as a way of protection, I think.
Mm-hmm. God, what a lovely set of words that you've used as not anodyne descriptors, but as motivations and even verbs. So reciprocity, pilgrimage, compassion. There is a deep sense of, well, you tell me, maybe I'm wrong. There's a deep sense throughout each of these projects, both at the conceptual level as well as at the execution level, of an effort to connect. Mm-hmm. And I think of that broadly as connected to the idea of community. Mm-hmm. And I also think it has an incredibly positive sort of valence, a sense of hopefulness, mm-hmm. And even an embedded utopianism to this work. What's interesting is that the issues that are also on the table here mm-hmm. are the world's waterways, mm-hmm. this gathering of people living in tents in this circumstance is a joyful gathering, but all over the world, people living in tents are a sign of forced migration.
Right.
I find one of the most amazing things about this show, the ways in which it has these kind of roots in human connectedness, and yet it touches also on some of the most difficult aspects of living on our planet. Mm.
Well, what came up for me when you were talking about that is also I mean, the question of why take these sort of very humble structures made from a lot of times throwaway materials, and even the, you know, the blue tarp that we all know and we associate with, you know, with gardens in our country, but in many of the other countries in the world, that's what the structure is.
Mhm.
So for me, it's like to take these really humble things that are made out of absolute necessity and then elevating them through kind of an elite, very elite
Mhm.
woven structure
Mhm.
that also costs money to make. That is, you know, but it's somehow trying to, you know, it's trying to elevate and look at the things that are, you know, that we usually don't see. I mean, a lot of this work that I do, I mean, I work very slowly. Things really develop over time, but it's about trying to see things that aren't necessarily so obvious.
Mhm.
Actually, Sean Foley came to the show the other day, and we sat on that bench, and I don't know, for a good hour or so, just sat in front of it, and it started to reveal itself. I mean, also through conversation. And I think that's what this is also about. It's like, I don't really make work in isolation. I mean, the starting point for any work is that I go out, but I don't go out with the intention. I didn't go to Mount Kailash to do a project. I didn't go to the Kumbh Mela, and I didn't go to Benares to make that work, but that work came out of being there, seeing things, and realizing that there is, you know, the interdependence of not only materials, but human beings is what makes, you know, experiences that we have to look at now, no matter how hard they are.
Mhm.
And so maybe presenting these structures in this way, where it, you know, yes, it gathers you because it is woven. I think, I mean, those of us who are in that field know that, that somatic feeling. And the fact that it was very confusing. People who didn't know anything about didn't know what they were looking at.
Mhm.
And I love that part. It's like, wait a minute. It's like, what am I looking at?
Mhm.
And so then having to sort of distill that kind of understanding or turn that around.
Yeah.
You know, and I often think of,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes, especially in, we talk about movements and big ideas coming, and how you have to go climb a mountain or go on a retreat somewhere. And, you know, I don't think you have to do any of those things. And I think with Kailash, the Kailash project, it was really asking the question, okay, we spent all this time and energy going to Kailash to have this experience of this mountain that has a strong mythological significance to millions of people. But is it only residing there? Can it reside in someone's backyard? You know, is it? And I think that the people who did this project in the book, they really showed me that that's absolutely true. But they also had to refigure, like, where do I do it? How do I do it? Who do I do it with? And what was interesting is that some people did it in community, some people use it as research, some people did it just by themselves and still revealed something about their environment. And by doing that, revealed something about themselves. So the work starts off relational, and I think it also ends relationally.
I think that's absolutely right. There's the entire process of translation. It's like, I almost felt, and particularly reading the book, like the effort to stay connected across this epistolary form, because of course you're asking people via letter and to send you things. And I'll tell you that my favorite essay in the book was they're not all essays, but my favorite written piece was Julie Poitras Santos, who wrote about a walk with friends, a couple of whom are in this room.
Yes, right.
And walking around the Back Cove in Portland, she spoke about the ways in which on the walk, everyone had a moment. They loaded the geography of this humble walk in our city with moments of history and knowledge, science, culture, their personal lives.
And memories of what the place was. Yeah.
And memories. And I thought that to me crystallized something about the kind of gap between process and execution.
Yeah.
That you sort of walked through in this process, in this overall process. And it spoke to me about the many ways in which the making a community is mysterious.
Yeah.
But the feeling isn't.
Yeah, and I think with, you know, I didn't know what to expect. I sent out the invitation and asked for water. What I received back was research, was people making work in response, photographs, sound, video, and reaching out into community, and this reaching out. There's also Ernesto Pujol did a piece where a dear friend of his lost her only son, and he used the project as to make a compassionate walk with her. And then out of the blue, a year after, because this always takes longer than you think, she called him and says, this is the anniversary. I'd like to take you on a walk and do it as well. So it was just like an afterword to the walk itself.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's lovely. This work feels different than your previous work.
Yes, it does feel very different. Well, I'm also in a very different place. I'm no longer teaching. And I think for those of us that have been in academia for a while, or institutions, maybe that's another way to say it, is I think something is required of us, especially in art schools, to, you know, to get as much out of our students as possible. And a lot of that is, you know, there's a lot of, especially in the program where I taught, you know, it was very theory heavy, where I think maybe at some point people lose their trust in their own process, that it's like, maybe I need to have that theoretical foundation in order to dare to make a move so I can justify what I'm doing. And I saw that over and over and over again. And I think when that's successful is when somebody finds something that resonates in many different things that we study. And then all of a sudden, you know, they don't make work about that. It's not a one-to-one relationship, which oftentimes is deadly. Most times it's deadly. But actually that becomes part of the material that's used in some way. And I think I had probably taken that on myself. And to the point where making in this work, I don't know, I just trust myself in another way. I'm not justifying my work in the way I used to when I was younger. And I needed to see these. I needed to see this. It was totally clear what anybody thought about them or where it fit into any larger scheme of things really didn't matter to me. It was so, I mean, I was here doing the residency and I looked at that wall and I just said, this isn't working. What has to happen? And I realized I'd seen a piece, a documenta, 2 documentas ago, and I can't remember her name at the moment. That's very bad, but it was this.
It's my life.
So anyway, I walked into a room and it was this enormous piece, and I had this reaction. I was like, what am I seeing here? And it was in Afghanistan. It's like a photograph of men standing in wool coats like this. And I almost, like, the hair went up on my arms. And I went over and I realized, oh my God, this thing is woven. And it was an entire room. It might've been like 50 feet by 20 feet high. It was amazing. And I thought, yeah, I get why this has to be there. There's no black like that. You felt the people standing on this, you know, it's a dead body, then there was lots of snow. But I think the fact that it was woven there is kind of embodied that image. Otherwise, it would have just been an image and been sort of far away. So I had that in my mind. And then I realized, you know, that's what this needs.
It's so interesting that you're saying that, because, and my mind is going to spin out in like 7 different directions, but I've been trying to figure out why fabric is coming back, why weaving is coming back, because I too have had experiences of seeing a kind of really serious community of artists, makers, one of whom I'm going to tell you all is in this room, thinking hard about materiality and what we still call craft, but maybe aren't quite as comfortable calling craft in a condescending way anymore. At least people who kind of have a particular set of investment in contemporary art, right?
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about that a lot, and it's so interesting to me to hear you talk about the way in which that materiality gives you access. It's sort of, I mean, there's a nurturing quality that I'm hearing you describe, which is so interesting. And I'm also spinning out a totally different direction, thinking about the fact that you and I talked about spirituality, which is also at the root of so much of this work. And it's not your spirituality, but there is a kind of profound welcome to taking spirituality seriously in this work. And I wonder if you reflect on that a little bit.
I'm thinking, I mean, what I want to say, it has never not been here.
Yeah. You warned me. That's true.
No. But also, there's at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, there's a wonderful department of material studies and, fiber material studies. And I think that, many of the artists teaching there and making work from there, and also I think Cranbrook Academy of Art, when Gerhard Nodell headed up the department when I was there, and he taught our course that we all clamored for, was the history of textiles. And if you think about that, I mean, you think about cloth as political, as architectural, as, as class. I mean, all of a sudden to think about it through a material. I mean, we can think about painting through that. We have a certain tradition and sculpture and so on. But it became, what I really started to understand there is that cloth had not only symbolic value in many cultures, it also has a necessity. I mean, nomads who travel, for instance. And it's also part of our everyday. It is something that no matter who you are in the world, you understand it and know it. And I think through looking at like a semester-long course in just like, what is this material and how does it affect human beings? I think that you can't help to see that it's not separated from us. It doesn't have an elite tradition, that it can't come from very humble backgrounds. I think many people have taken it in many different directions. I think what you might be referring to is that all of a sudden people who are not necessarily from the so-called tradition are also using it sometimes. And then the question is, why is it? I think it's because it's also, I mean, there are lots of reasons. I mean, many of them are also, it's community based. If you think of that, I mean, if you think of all the, the crocheting and knitting and all these things that are happening in community, people feel as if they need to have that community. And even artists who are making work to have it be made in or collaborate with community. And I think we do feel that. I think this whole notion of the isolated artist, there's so many ways to make work now. I mean, there isn't just one way. And I think judging that is completely, I don't really want to. I think that because we live in such a complex world, that the complexity of the world needs to be reflected in the complexity of how we make work. And spirituality, it's always been a dirty word. In the art world, I'll preface that. Bonnie Maranka, who's the editor of a performance art journal, she says, I wanted to write about that. And especially she does a lot of work with Meredith Monk and Alison Knowles and so on. And they say, it's like, I can't use that word. But so I'm not even sure that the word itself it's not religion, but it's a practice. If it's a practice of observing, of really looking, about really paying attention, well, that kind of practice can be equated as spirituality. I think of Buddhism. Buddhism is not a religion. That's what the Dalai Lama says. It's basically a man who did all those things and then reflected on the nature of the world and the reality of that nature. And if you accept the fact that we're all going to die. that's just how things are. So why really fight that? Why not pay attention on that level and realize that there is such an interconnectedness between all of us, not just all of us, but everything around us. And that if we really pay attention to that, what that really means, would we have an economic crisis? Would we have an environmental crisis? Would we have a political crisis? I mean, that sounds extremely idealistic, but in the larger sense, I think that's what, the Dalai Lama is trying to say, is that by paying attention, and there's also Robert Thurman talks about this. He says, well, if you just, some people say, just imagine the audience is naked. Then the other thing he says is, imagine everyone here has been your mother and you have been their mother. I mean, that's this. And then all of a sudden you can't treat people the way people are being treated in this day and age.
Well, I'll tell you something that I've never told anyone. We're not quite there. We're good.
No, I have to hear this.
Okay, I'll tell you something. I've never said in public, but I'm going to stand by it. One of the reasons that I became an art historian, and particularly became so interested in working with living artists, is because, as some of you know, I'm a PK, a preacher's kid, and I was raised in a Christian tradition. And the mystery of something coming from nothing, something coming from hope, to me translates exactly onto the mystery of an artist process. And that sounds really weird and uncool.
That's very brave of you.
Well, maybe I'm just old now. I don't know, but there is, and we talked a little bit about this. We talked about allowing mystery, which I think you're right to point out in every artistic practice. The mystery on some level is always embedded. That is, I mean, art is basically faith-based, right, on some level. But it's been very rich for me to explore that concept in the context of this exhibition.
Oh, great. It's also, there is no way of controlling everything. And trying to do that just sets you up for failure. So
but your work also has a high level of, the level of detail.
No, detail, absolutely. But it's in those details, right? That's where things happen, and how things are set up for an experience to happen. So I don't claim that these, I don't want to make a claim. All I want to do is confuse people enough that they slow down to really see. And then if that's the case, then we slow down everywhere. I'll be the first one to say that my work helps me with that. It's the greatest teacher in that way.
Well, it's interesting. I think, that idea of confusing to slow one down. I'll call out another beloved artist in this room, Aaron Steffen, who several years ago said to me, beauty just helps me get people in the door on something like that. And I think that there is another kind of nugget of, we live in a world in which it's very difficult to pay attention to things. And I think one of the things that, this work is asking us to do is actually to kind of scramble our attention and just focus.
Yeah, I would think so. And I think actually when I look into the room, there are many of us here, I think we're all trying to do that. And it sounds what it sounds like. It's important, And I think of Lauren's show going off now with these incredible, these worlds that she's making, or Wooly, this huge painting she's making of questioning where does the universe end? Can we even ask those questions? And I like to think that we can ask whatever we want to ask. And, there's the whole thing, like what makes you responsible? And I think it's a huge question, obviously, and I know that we're coming to the questions here, but I think responsibility is, are really just paying attention to what really matters, what's really important, what's ethical. Like, how do we really describe what our ethics is? How do we choose to live in the world? And, I know that we're, as artists, we make things that it might not make sense in a million years, but they're necessary. And I think especially during the last, president of this country, I felt more of an urgency to stick to what I know how to do.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And you talked about questions, so I know we're going to take questions. And I'll close by saying, maybe that sense of ethics, that sense of responsibility, that sense of being open is really embedded in this project because of the number of collaborators. First with Walking Kailash, but then with the act of giving and receiving, and then the way in which you collaborated in so many different ways on this. So I think that I want to kind of extend that concept of translation as well as that concept of community to just the network of collaborators that go into making this happen.
Yeah.
And our collaborator tonight is being very patient on because we're ready for questions, and we're just here chatting.
But you see, I don't see, I hear you saying that it's coming in and out. I have always experienced it from the people that I know, the artists that I know, of always being not in or out, but in, but maybe extending being into different contexts. Like a lot of installation work, for instance, that merges really well. I think of Ann Hamilton's work that she's done. I think her work has moved people because of not only her understanding of the language of materials, and the especially this massive effect that you can have, like tents, like the Kumail. It's the many, like her piece at the Dia early on, or her recent exhibition at the Armory. I think that scale of fabric that moves in a certain way is that how many things move, and that we actually know within us how that feels. I suppose we could look at steel, and I don't know, maybe you, Aaron, you have another way of looking at this, but I feel that with cloth, it's so close to us. We went through the 60s, and then we had those large, like the Jacobis who were making these large scale works, and the Abakans, Abakanovich. And I think, and I don't know, it was of a certain time, and now things are, I think, reappearing again. I don't have the perfect answer for it. I know that many of us went from making this, and I wanted to see what happens in the layers of things. So I made a lot of installation work, like taking the onion skin apart and seeing through projection, and working with, Danny McCusker, making stage sets. But I never lost that sensibility of the materiality of things.
And I think you said something earlier that was very interesting. It feels connected to this, which is that I do think we're in a moment in which a lot of artists are taking the concept of collaboration quite seriously. And this too is something that comes and goes. But I'm thinking right now at the De Cordova, we have a show by Sonia Clark, who had a residency at the Fabric Workshop, and invited participants to make 100 dish towels from looms. And the dish towels, of course, are the representation of, well, not of course, because I didn't know this until I learned about it through Sonia, but are the symbol, the white flag of surrender, the end of the Civil War. And her effort was to invite so many people to participate in that they would essentially be replacing their memories of the Confederate flag with the white dish towel. And that, you picked up on collaboration as being a kind of a central idea. And I think that actually is connected to something about our interest.
But it's also, I think, labor. It's really labor intensive. I think of, Ann Wilson, the work that she has done in community, and also having people come together to weave, but to call out the histories of the place. And I think that is, a way of doing that. I don't know if in any other, it comes from a craft tradition, tradition which is in community. And, it's not, this conversation has been had for many long time about what we call fine art. And I'm not so interested in having that conversation anymore. But I think of, the feminist movement had a lot to do with basically saying, modernist painting, it was about erasing the hand. It was really not, it's about the paint. When in fact you're saying, you know what, the diapers, the material, the things that I do in my everyday has meaning, and that we are not going to exclude it just because it's so-called women's work.
That's right.
And so you think of that early, in the 60s and early 70s. I mean, I studied with a teacher who came from that tradition. I mean, I didn't understand where she said when I first met her, but I realized she was talking about these really strong feminist concepts. And those were, I think, ideas that we had to fight for, to have them be on the same, in the same arena,
right,
as painting and sculpture.
Yeah, be told as part of the story of art.
Yeah, I mean, but I think of Cranbrook, for instance, where I went to graduate school, or many of the schools now. It's just one of many departments. And what's the interesting thing about fiber material studies in Chicago is that so many students from other departments want to take introduction to fiber. They want to be in there because it's, there's a richness in the materials.
And a connectedness to all manner of different traditions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What a thoughtful, cool question.
Yeah. I mean, I was given my first camera when we moved to the States. I was 12, and my father, we were going to go to Washington, D.C., and he gave me my first camera. I think you've seen that photo. I mean, I was so happy with this camera, but I took my first photo of my sister on the boat coming, and she's sleeping on a Swedish flag. I mean, I've always had camera. I mean, it's always been like second nature. I've always been, recording, whether it's, the 2 years I spent in Iran, going overland through Afghanistan, or through India. It's a relationship I have. I don't have the same relationship now, because I think early on, now it's, I'm so much more aware of, not wanting to invade people's space, being respectful. And I think that's one thing I think I will say also about this work, is that I couldn't do work about the Kumbh Mela. I couldn't do work about that event. I think the construction of what made the event work was where I felt like I could ask questions, like about these large structures, because they were larger than the event. And I wasn't making a commentary. I wasn't judging. I wasn't trying to tell a story about, because it's, as we know, I mean, who am I to do that? And it's very, and we're talking about these issues much more now than we did, 30 years ago, where, there just wasn't that kind of consciousness.
Well, and the documentary or journalistic photographs I've seen of the Kumbh Mela often focus on the massive bodies.
Yes.
And you're very interested in more or less empty spaces.
Yep. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I had a show of the photographs in Benares. The curator said, and I said, "Are you sure you want to show these?" I felt like it's like, no one's going to, they're not going to believe it's the Kumbh Mela. But so it was a really interesting conversation, because that particular event is about emptying. It's everyone is a pot, and you come full, and by dipping you empty, and through that emptiness there's the possibility of the reversing of bad karma, and you start from scratch. And so you have the ability to sort of transform yourself through this merging of the waters.
I'm so glad you asked that question. I feel like we just learned so much.
So, I mean, this idea of empty spaces, and especially in a place that is about emptiness. Well, the thing with emptiness, as I understand it, depending on how you look at it, emptiness is extremely rich. There really is this whole notion that there is nothing. There's always something, and there's nothing in this emptiness. And I think in these particular spaces, as I experienced them, it was really entering an arena where something, the emptiness of it spoke to an event that might have happened or is about to happen. And I'm in this place of transition in some sense. And I think emptiness is also the place of possibility. And that these, even though they are, I mean, they're readings and they're rich, they're places that one what do I really want to say about that? There's a richness in it, I guess. And I guess with the kumela is that you have that opportunity to fill again. I'm not sure that was the right answer, Rachel, but that was a good question. I don't know, Randy. I think that's a question for you. I mean, but I think in terms of rather than soul, maybe memory. I mean, I have my grandmother's, napkins and pillowcases that she has embroidered my initials on. So for me, I have a relationship with that cloth in a way that, someone else wouldn't. And I think it becomes very, very personal. I think of all those kids with their blankies, that like the parents are terrified that they're going to lose it and they won't sleep for a week. I think that's how I would answer that. I think that we project meaning, or the meaning is embedded in fabric through experience and relationship that we have with them. Okay, that's a good question, because I didn't really talk about it technically in that way. What I did with the weavers was to visit. They sent me samples. We went back and forth. And there are very many different choices. I mean, I wanted to be weaving. I wanted to have the weight, almost so that the weight of the fabric was sort of close to the weight of the image. But I'm going to do this. For instance, can you see that online? This is a relief weave, meaning that it's softer weave. And so when you have white on the outside, you have darkness on the back, and vice versa, versus the flat weave, which is more of a balanced weave in the other weavings. The reason this needed to be that is because I was trying to do the opposite. I mean, I was trying to have the white recede, but it could only recede with certain sheen on the white and also texture. So by using this particular weave, there's a puckering that takes place, and that puckering then pulls the light and shadows, and it pulls you back. I think also these lines here help to do that. But so this needed, I mean, the weaver actually suggested it, and I was insistent that no, I want it to be a flat weave. And he was right. After so many tries, it wasn't, but he had cotton, and I said, let's do silk. And it wasn't until our ideas merged that this thing came together. So it moves in a very different way, has a very different hand than the other pieces, which is a little stiffer. But with those, that makes much more, that make more sense. So I was really trying to match the feel of the image with the particular material and a particular weave.
Bodies. And what I can see right now on the screen is that actually this weird thing is happening for those of you at home. It looks like we're in this tent.
It's true.
It really does. And here in the space, this is reading much more as a made object that we're sitting in front of, but it really looks like we're sitting in a tent. And yet other weavings in the space actively reject our presence. We're passersby outside.
Yeah. I think with all of this, I mean, choosing to make them into these jacquard weavings and also hang them the way I did, that they're not flat and perfectly hung and between the Velcro on the back, is that there's an insistence that even though this is, an illusion of other materials, it is a material object, and so are you. So I think that you're actually in the same space, which is different than the illusion of a photograph or realistic painting where you project yourself in. There's an insistence that you don't do that. And that was really clear to me. And that's why this texture here couldn't be a flat copy, because it would reinforce this illusion. I mean, I wanted to like hover in a space that you don't know where you are, but the only way you have to figure it out is like you have to get up really close to really see what's happening and to examine, but that it is an object in space the way you are. This, I mean, these two pieces here, this is the only one where you actually, you feel like you're going in, and it's true. It feels like we're sitting in this bizarre place. And it works with this other piece. And please, those of you at home, I mean, everything is on the website. but this is at night looking in. So one is, there's the same light, but from within. So it's doing two separate things. It's the same, but they're separate. And that piece seemed really opposite, where you have to feel yourself in relationship to the, to what you're looking at. Does that answer that at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So
I feel that we have done our work.
I just thank you for coming here. Really, this
Thank
is really
you.
wonderful. I'm so glad that we're doing this.
Me too. Congratulations.
Well,
I
thank
probably
you.
didn't say that before.
Oh,
But,
congratulations on your new job.
well, now they're going to fire me because I told them I have this like religious history.
I doubt that.
But I think you've really achieved something here, and I'm so grateful that you shared part of the story of that achievement with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.